At a luxury women's clinic in Atlanta, a pregnant black woman arrives alone for a scheduled checkup. But instead of care, she's met with cruel judgment. A white doctor mocks her as abandoned, then accuses her of stealing. Within minutes, she's detained by security like a criminal. But what the staff doesn't know is that her husband, calm, composed, and carrying a federal badge, is already en route. And when he arrives, the entire room will learn exactly who they just tried to humiliate. Danielle Thompson wasn't late. Her appointment was at 10 a.m., and she had arrived by 9:45, even pausing to smooth the wrinkles in her maternity dress before walking in. Her steps were measured, careful, not just because she was 7 months pregnant, but because she had learned to move cautiously in spaces that weren't built for her, especially in places like this. The Wellington Women's Center, known for its high-end services, spa-like lobbies, and mostly white clientele. She approached the front desk, gently placing her ID and insurance card on the marble counter. The receptionist, a thin, tight-smiled woman named Brielle, took one glance before leaning back in her chair with a sigh. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Danielle replied calmly. "Danielle Thompson, 10 a.m. with Dr. Halbert." A pause. The receptionist clicked through her computer with exaggerated slowness. "Sit over there," she finally said, pointing to the corner of the waiting room. Danielle obeyed. She didn't react when the other women in the waiting area glanced away and then quickly looked back at their phones. She didn't react when no one offered her a smile, or when the nurse who finally called her back asked 3 times if she had insurance. She just kept her hand on her belly, steadying her breath. The exam room was cold, clinical. Dr. Halbert entered 10 minutes later, flipping through Danielle's chart like it was a mistake she had correct. "No partner with you today?" the doctor asked, barely looking up. Danielle shook her head. "He's working." Figures," Dr. Halbert muttered under her breath, scribbling something down. The appointment moved quickly. Too quickly. The measurements were rushed. The questions clipped. Danielle's concerns about back pain were dismissed with a shrug. As the visit wrapped up, Dr. Halbert abruptly stood and glanced toward the counter near the sink. "My watch is missing," she said flatly. Danielle blinked. "I'm sorry. It was just here. Gold Rolex. I took it off before the exam." The nurse, wide-eyed, said nothing. The doctor's stare turned sharp. "No one else has been in this room." Within minutes, security was called. Danielle was stunned silent as 2 uniformed officers entered and asked her to come with them. She wasn't arrested, just detained for questioning. But that word, detained, felt like a crack in her ribs. They took her phone, her bag, her dignity. "Ma'am, if you didn't take anything, you have nothing to worry about," one of the officers said, not unkindly. But it wasn't kindness that Danielle needed. It was belief. It was justice. In a side hallway near the staff entrance, she sat on a hard plastic chair with her hands on her belly, breathing carefully. No one had explained her rights. No one had checked the security cameras. No one had even offered her water. She wasn't just afraid. She was exhausted of always needing to be calm, polite, and composed while being treated like less than human. She closed her eyes, not out of fear, but because she was trying to hold in the scream. In the room next door, Brielle whispered to a nurse. I knew something was off about her the second she walked in. A whisper loud enough to wound. But what no one knew, not the doctor, not the nurse, not even the security guard standing at the door, was that Danielle's husband, Ethan Thompson, had just parked outside. And when he walked through those doors, he wouldn't be shouting. He wouldn't need to. He would be carrying a badge and the truth. Ethan Thompson was no ordinary man, a federal agent with years of experience. He had learned early in his career that power didn't come from loud voices or angry confrontations. It came from calm precision, from knowing your rights and using them without hesitation. As he parked his car, his phone buzzed, a text from Danielle. "They're detaining me. Please hurry." He took a deep breath and stepped into the lobby of the Wellington Women's Center, the soft music and pristine marble contrasting sharply with the tension tightening his chest. The receptionist's nervous glance flicked up as he passed, but he ignored it. His focus was on finding Danielle. Inside, Danielle sat stiffly in a narrow hallway outside the security office. Her back was straight, but her eyes told a different story: confusion, fear, and the silent anger that came from being wrongly accused. She was 7 months pregnant, yet the weight on her shoulders seemed heavier than any physical burden. When the security officers saw Ethan approach, their demeanor shifted immediately. He showed his badge calmly, a small rectangular piece of metal that changed everything in that room. Agent Thompson. One of them greeted nervously. Is my wife being detained? Ethan's voice was steady, unwavering. The younger officer swallowed. There was a report of theft, sir. We're just conducting an investigation. Ethan's eyes locked on Danielle's. She gave a small, relieved nod, her voice barely above a whisper. They think I stole something. And what's your response to that? Ethan asked gently, kneeling beside her. I didn't. I was just here for my appointment. Her voice cracked slightly. Ethan stood, addressing the officers and staff gathered nearby. I need to see the security footage from the exam room. Now. The request wasn't a demand, but no one dared refuse. As the security manager fumbled with the system, Ethan turned to Danielle. I'm here. I've got you. That simple reassurance seemed to steady her even more. Minutes later, the grainy footage began to play. The video showed Danielle entering the exam room alone. Dr. Halbert sat on a stool, examining charts. At one point, the doctor removed her watch and placed it on the counter. Danielle never touched the watch. The footage suddenly cut off for a few seconds, exactly when the watch disappeared. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Pause it there. Rewind. They played the footage again in slow motion. A nurse, previously unseen, walked into the room just before the video cut. After the cutoff, the watch was gone. The staff exchanged uncomfortable looks. You're certain this was not reported before today? Ethan asked. No, the security manager admitted. The doctor just noticed it was missing after the exam. Ethan nodded. This changes everything. Turning to Danielle, he handed her back her phone and bag. You're free to go, and I expect a full apology from the staff here. Danielle looked up, tears threatened to fall, but replaced with something fiercer. Dignity restored. She stood slowly, supporting her belly with one hand. Thank you. The room was silent, the weight of what had happened settling like a thick fog. Ethan didn't shout or slam his badge down. He didn't need to. His presence, the undeniable proof, and his quiet confidence had already shifted the balance. Danielle's ordeal wasn't just a personal battle. It was a stark reminder of the assumptions and biases that black women face every day, especially in spaces meant to care for them. As they walked toward the exit, Ethan glanced around the waiting room, where other patients stared silently. Danielle squeezed his hand. This isn't just about me. He nodded, already thinking about the next steps, complaints, policy changes, awareness. Because this moment, painful as it was, could become a turning point. They weren't just survivors of bias. They were agents of change. And this fight was far from over. The sterile fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Ethan stepped fully into the clinic's main lobby. His presence was immediate, but not in a way that demanded attention through noise or aggression. Instead, it was a quiet, undeniable force, the kind of authority that makes people reassess their actions in an instant. The staff members who had earlier ignored Danielle's distress suddenly found their gazes darting nervously toward him. The receptionist's fingers paused above her keyboard. The security officer straightened, the weight of his federal badge pressing down on them more than any words could. Ethan didn't shout. He didn't storm in with fury. Instead, he approached the front desk with a calm, measured stride, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Danielle. Seated alone, tense but steady. He knelt beside her, his voice low and steady. Danielle, I'm here. I've got you. Her eyes flickered up, relief briefly softening the fear in them. She managed a small nod, barely trusting the moment. It was the first glimmer of hope she'd had since she was falsely accused. Ethan then turned to the security officers. I understand there's been an accusation of theft. One of the officers, a young man clearly uncomfortable, nodded. Yes, sir. We receive a report about a missing watch from one of the exam rooms. Ethan's expression remained unreadable. And have you reviewed the surveillance footage? The security manager hesitated. We've started, but it's inconclusive. Ethan raised a hand. I'll see it. Minutes later, the room gathered around a small monitor. The grainy security footage played. Danielle entered the exam room, visibly pregnant, calm and composed. Dr. Halbert was already seated, preparing charts. At one point, the doctor took off her watch and set it on the counter. Danielle never reached toward it. Suddenly, the footage cut out for several seconds, missing what happened next. When the video resumed, the watch was gone. Ethan's jaw tightened. Pause it there. Rewind and slow it down. The group watched again as a nurse appeared in the doorway, stepping in just before the footage cut. No one had expected that. Ethan's voice cut through the room with quiet authority. This isn't just a missing watch. It's a disappearance on your watch, literally. Where was this nurse during that gap? The staff exchanged uncomfortable glances. The clinic director shifted in his seat. Ethan's gaze hardened. Danielle, you were never the suspect here. He turned to the security team. You owe her an apology, and the clinic owes her a serious review of policies and training on racial profiling. Turning back to Danielle, Ethan handed her phone and purse with a gentle nod. You're free to go. She stood, steadying herself with a hand on her belly, her voice firm but calm. Thank you, Ethan. As they walked toward the exit, Ethan spoke quietly. This is bigger than you or me, Danielle. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Danielle's eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. I want to help. If my story can stop this from happening again, I'll speak up. Ethan nodded. That's why I'm here. We'll take this all the way. Outside the clinic, the afternoon sun was warm on their faces. Danielle took a deep breath, not because the nightmare was over, but because a new fight had begun. Her husband's quiet strength had turned the tide, but the road ahead was long. The power imbalance that had threatened to destroy her dignity was exposed for what it was, a systemic problem hiding behind policies and assumptions. Ethan looked at her with unwavering resolve. We'll get justice, not just for you, but for every black woman who's been ignored or dismissed. Danielle squeezed his hand, the strength in that simple gesture speaking volumes. They were ready, together. In the days following Ethan's intervention, the atmosphere at the clinic shifted in subtle but powerful ways. The once cold, indifferent staff began to realize that this was no longer just another incident to brush under the rug. Danielle's story was gaining traction, not because of anger or noise, but through undeniable facts and the quiet authority Ethan wielded. Surveillance footage became the clinic's own undoing. The missing seconds revealed more than anyone had anticipated. The nurse caught on camera, who had access to the exam rooms during the footage blackout, was soon placed on leave pending investigation. The clinic director, who initially tried to downplay the incident, found himself compelled to hold meetings addressing implicit bias and patient rights. Policy discussions, once ignored, were suddenly urgent. Danielle, still pregnant and vulnerable, was no longer alone in the sterile hallways. As she walked through them now, she carried herself differently. Gone was a look of defeat. Instead, she stood tall, her gaze clear and determined. Ethan's presence had not just offered protection. It had rekindled something within her. One afternoon, in a quiet corner of the clinic, Danielle sat with a group of staff undergoing new sensitivity training. Her voice, once barely a whisper, now carried strength and conviction. You need to see us as people, she said, eyes locking with those in the room. Not problems, not stereotypes. Every time you let fear or bias dictate your actions, you risk someone's life. The staff listened. Some nodded. Others avoided her gaze, but no one interrupted. Camille, a nurse who had avoided Danielle since the incident, approached quietly after the session. I didn't realize how much my actions could hurt, she admitted, voice low. Danielle smiled softly, a mixture of forgiveness and resolve in her eyes. It's not about blame. It's about change. The clinic's board convened to review Ethan's recommendations for systemic reforms. They approved a comprehensive overhaul. mandatory anti-bias training, clear protocols for patient treatment regardless of race, and a patient advocacy office to oversee complaints and ensure accountability. Meanwhile, Danielle worked closely with Ethan to document her experience, preparing for a formal complaint to be filed with the medical board. It was exhausting, emotionally and physically, but each step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself stolen that day. One evening, as Danielle rested at home, she reflected on the storm that had passed and the calm that followed. "I wasn't just fighting for me," she told Ethan quietly. "I'm fighting so no other woman has to face this alone." Ethan nodded, admiring her quiet strength. "You're not just a survivor, Danielle. You're a leader." Her transformation was palpable. Where one silence had threatened to swallow her, she now spoke with purpose, ready to give voice to those still unheard. The clinic's atmosphere continued to change. Patients, especially Black women, began sharing their own stories, small but significant experiences of neglect and bias. These testimonies fueled further reforms, making the space safer and more welcoming. Ethan remained by Danielle's side, not as a savior, but as an unwavering partner. Together, they organized community meetings to educate others about patient rights and systemic bias in healthcare. One day, a young Black woman approached Danielle after a session. "Thank you," she said softly. "You made me feel seen." And that was the moment Danielle realized the true power of her journey, transforming pain into purpose, fear into courage, and invisibility into visibility. As the clinic slowly healed, so did Danielle. Her pregnancy progressed with fewer worries about discrimination and more hope for the future. Her fight had only just begun, but now it was one fought with allies, facts, and a voice that would not be silenced. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, but its impact would echo far beyond the sterile walls of the clinic. In a large, glass-walled boardroom, filled with hospital executives, legal advisors, and medical staff, Danielle stood poised. The room was thick with tension, the kind that swells when truth meets resistance. Ethan stood beside her, calm and steady, a quiet pillar of strength. He had already outlined the legal consequences the clinic faced: formal complaints, federal investigations, and potential lawsuits. But today was not about law. It was about humanity. Danielle took a slow breath, feeling the weight of months of silence, pain, and invisibility lift with each word she was about to speak. Her pregnancy was evident, a soft curve beneath her tailored blouse, a reminder of the stakes. "You looked at me and saw something disposable," she began, her voice clear, resonant, commanding the room's full attention. "You didn't see a patient, a human being. You saw a problem you wanted to erase." She paused, letting her words settle like stones thrown into still water. Eyes shifted uncomfortably. Some faces hardened, others betrayed shame. "I came here for care," Danielle continued, "for a moment of peace and safety in the middle of a vulnerable time. Instead, I was met with suspicion, with insults, with the assumption that I was a thief, a criminal, a threat." The boardroom was silent, save for Danielle's measured breaths and the soft hum of the air conditioning. The power dynamics that had ruled the clinic that day seemed to unravel with every word she spoke. "You treated me like a discarded woman, someone invisible, unworthy of respect or dignity. And for what? Because of the color of my skin? Because I was alone and pregnant." Her eyes swept across the room, daring anyone to contradict her truth. The clinic director cleared his throat, preparing to offer defense, but Ethan raised a hand. "No," Ethan said firmly. "Let her finish." Danielle's voice softened, but her message only grew stronger. "I am not just here to speak for myself. I am here to speak for every Black woman who's been unseen, unheard, and uncared for in spaces that promise healing." She reached inside her purse and pulled out a folded letter, statements from other patients who had faced similar discrimination. These voices are not isolated incidents. They're the echoes of a system that needs change. The room absorbed the weight of that truth. After a moment, the clinic's chief medical officer spoke, his tone subdued. "We acknowledge the harm caused. Effective immediately, Dr. Halbert is suspended pending further investigation. We will implement the recommended reforms and conduct thorough staff retraining." Danielle nodded, accepting the statement as a first step, but knowing that words alone would never suffice. Ethan stepped forward next. We will also be filing formal complaints with the medical board and pursuing policy changes to prevent this from happening again. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about systemic change. Danielle's eyes locked with Ethan's, gratitude and resolve shining through. Together, they had shifted the narrative from victimhood to leadership. As the meeting adjourned, Danielle felt the flood of emotion she had held back. Relief, exhaustion, but above all, hope. Hope that her story, her voice, would be a catalyst, not just for her, but for all those still waiting to be seen. Outside the building, reporters gathered, sensing a story bigger than one woman's struggle. Danielle prepared to speak to the world, to turn her pain into purpose on a much larger stage. "You looked at me and saw a problem," she told the cameras. "But I am here to show you that when we refuse to be invisible, when we demand respect, change becomes inevitable." Her words rippled through the community, sparking conversations about race, healthcare, and justice. Danielle was no longer a silent victim. She was a leader lighting the path forward. The weeks following Danielle's breakthrough moment were marked by a series of quiet but powerful shifts. Shifts that began to dismantle the walls of bias and neglect that had long hidden beneath the clinic's polished surface. Dr. Halbert, once confident in his untouchable position, was now suspended indefinitely. The hospital board had launched a comprehensive review of all patient care policies, particularly focusing on racial bias and cultural competency. Staff members underwent mandatory diversity and sensitivity training. Workshops that once felt like tedious requirements now became essential conversations about dignity and respect. But the changes went deeper than policies and paperwork. Danielle's story, once a whispered rumor in the clinic's corridors, became a rallying cry for justice in medical spaces across the city. At the press conference where Danielle first spoke publicly, she was no longer the frightened, isolated woman who had entered the clinic weeks before. She was an advocate with a mission, a voice for every black woman who had ever been dismissed or dehumanized by the very systems meant to protect her. "We will not disappear just to make others comfortable," she declared, her hands resting gently on her growing belly. "We demand care that respects our humanity, our lives, our futures." Her words resonated deeply with the community. Local activists and health organizations reached out, inspired to partner with Danielle in pushing for broader reforms beyond a single clinic. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to support Danielle, not as a protector, but as an equal partner. His role shifted from shield to ally, standing beside her as she led initiatives for equitable health care. Together, they attended city council meetings, spoke at medical conferences, and worked to ensure the voices of marginalized patients were heard loud and clear. For Danielle, the journey was as personal as it was public. The trauma of her detention lingered, but it no longer defined her. Instead, it fueled a powerful resolve to transform pain into purpose. She began volunteering with organizations dedicated to maternal health equity, helping pregnant women navigate healthcare systems often riddled with bias. Her own experience became a guiding light for others, a testament that even in the darkest moments, courage could spark change. Back at the clinic, the atmosphere shifted too. Staff members, once indifferent or dismissive, began to confront their own prejudices. Training sessions evolved into ongoing dialogues, fostering empathy and understanding. The hospital administration committed to transparent reporting on incidents of discrimination and established patient advisory boards that included voices from diverse communities. While the changes were far from perfect, they marked a new chapter, one where justice was not just a fleeting headline but a sustained commitment. Danielle often reflected on the journey from that harrowing day in the clinic to the movement she now helped lead. The moment Ethan flashed his badge, asserting authority and law, was pivotal, but it was Danielle's voice, steady, honest, and unyielding, that truly moved hearts and minds. In a quiet moment at home, she looked down at her belly and smiled. "This isn't just about me," she whispered. "It's about all of us, for every mother, every child who deserves to be seen." Her story became a beacon, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and demand change. The ripple effect reached beyond healthcare, touching schools, workplaces, and communities where systemic bias still lingered. Danielle knew the work was ongoing. There would be setbacks and challenges, But for the first time, she felt hopeful, not because injustice had vanished, but because now it could no longer hide in silence. As she prepared for motherhood, Danielle embraced a new identity: survivor, leader, and catalyst for change. And with every step forward, she carried the strength of those who had been unseen for far too long. The community's response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded in from women who had faced similar struggles, from families demanding better treatment, and from advocates ready to join the cause. Danielle's story ignited conversations nationwide about how pregnant Black women are often neglected and mistreated in healthcare systems. Ethan stood quietly beside her, proud, but knowing this was Danielle's moment to lead. Their partnership had evolved, no longer just husband-protector, but co-advocates for justice. The clinic's leadership promised transparency and accountability, but Danielle knew real change required constant vigilance and collective effort. Still, the seeds had been planted. As she prepared to welcome her child into the world, Danielle held on to hope that this child and all children would inherit a future where care was not a privilege but a right. Her journey was far from over, but one thing was certain: Danielle's voice would never be silenced again.